and get started.
Great. Well, welcome everyone to our second discussion of landscaping standards for the preserve. The decision to have a special landscaping assessment was made by a prior board, and the rollout should have started with a meeting like this. However, it didn't. And that mistake is still causing irritation in parts of the community. The current board felt like the only way to resolve this was to let the community decide for themselves what the landscaping standard should be in the preserve. And Shannon has put together a discussion of the differences between landscaping in the preserve versus landscaping in the rest of the island. Kika has no position on this, and the presentation is not trying to promote one outcome or another. We simply hope that this allows you to make an informed decision about your community and the appropriateness of the assessment. So with that, Shannon, do you want to take it?
Sure. Let me share my screen and get this presentation up for you. Okay. Leah, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So as Dave said, we're going to go through and talk about landscaping on Kiawah. And there's a couple goals for our presentation today. One is to gain a shared understanding of landscape around the island. Landscaping is more complex than people give it credit for. There's a lot of people involved in landscaping around the island, so we want to gain a shared understanding of that. We want to understand what Kika does in a standard neighborhood here on the island, and we're going to talk about Rhett's Bluff. That's the neighborhood that's being compared today. And then we want to understand what the preserve's current standard is. We want to understand what's going on in the preserve to make you all a little bit different. We want to understand your financials back there. And again, all of this is so that you can make an informed choice when the board asks you the question about your landscaping. So that's the goals for today and how we're going to move through the presentation today. At the end of the presentation, there'll be lots of time for questions and comments, as Leah indicated already, so we'll have plenty of time to answer all your questions. So let's talk about landscaping on Kiawah. And as we're talking about landscaping, particularly for this presentation, we're really talking about road rights of way. Most of our members are very aware of the fact that Kika owns the roads, the asphalt of the roads. But actually what Kika owns is road rights of way. Kika is deeded property. In residential properties, it's about 50 feet in width. So if you think about a 50-foot wide strip and you're thinking about the preserve, Blue Heron Pond Road lies within that 50-foot road right-of-way that Kika owns. So obviously Blue Heron Pond Road is not 50 feet wide. It's about 22 feet wide. So there's land on either side depending upon how Blue Heron Pond curves and fits within that road right-of-way. So when we're talking about landscaping of road rights of way, we're talking about that land that's on either side of the asphalt area that is currently deeded to Kika. So there's a lot of different people involved or companies involved in landscaping across the island. So it could be us. It could be Kiawah Partners in the club. They obviously are maintaining their properties across the island. They're maintaining Ocean Park itself, the park, except for the trails and ponds, which have been deeded to Kika. Kiawah Island Golf Resort obviously maintains a lot of property across the island. They also maintain the road and road rights of way for Sanctuary Beach Drive, which they own that road. They also maintain the road rights of way down in the newly redeveloped West Beach area around the new traffic circle. The resort redid that roadway. The roadway is owned by Kika, but Kiawah Island Golf Resort is maintaining the landscaping in that road right of way because they chose what they wanted that area to look like. The town of Kiawah Island, of course, owns Beachwalker Drive and maintains it. They also maintain the Kiawah Island Parkway from the main gate out to the traffic circle. We've all seen the town's reinvestment in the road right-of-way landscaping on that road that's been going on the last several weeks. And then there's regimes that are involved and individual members that are involved. So we're going to get in and we're going to talk about the regimes a little bit. We're going to talk about individual members and KICA. So there are actually 31 regime areas across the island on Kiawah Island. So a regime area is a neighborhood association. It's a formalized HOA. It has its own management. It has its own board. It has its own assessments for that specific neighborhood. And there are 31 of these across the island. These are just a few examples of regimes across the island. Most of these are single-family home areas like the preserve, and you can see that they've chosen their level of landscape within their community or their neighborhood, and those owners are paying for their regime to maintain that landscaping. The one that's not a single-family home area in here is Sparrow Pond, and I put that one in here because it's an interesting community. When KICA decided to work on the redevelopment of West Beach landscaping, Sparrow Pond was one of the first regimes that jumped in and said, we want to participate too. We don't like the road rights of way in our community, and we want to heighten that level of landscape in there. We want to change the aesthetic. KICA owns the roads within the Sparrow Pond community, and so Sparrow Pond worked with us on a landscape upgrade plan, and that regime paid for that landscaping, and they pay to maintain it today. And it's really beautiful, the enhancements that they made down there. So what does KICA maintain? So when we're looking at common properties across the island, we do things at different aesthetic levels. We maintain road rights of way to include cul-de-sacs, medians, and neighborhood entrances. We do leisure trails, which most of our owners know, pond bank edges, boardwalks, pond dock areas, and of course our facilities. Now, KICA does maintain spine or parkway roads. So Governor's Drive, Kiawah Island Parkway, Ocean Course Drive, these are roads that previous boards of directors feel are the entryway or the front door to all of the neighborhoods on Kiawah Island. And as such, they are maintained at a higher aesthetic level. So you see the more formalized landscaping along these roads. You see a lot of irrigation and turf. And that's because these spine or parkway roads were deemed as entryways to the neighborhoods. And so they are maintained at a different level for KICA. So if you're looking at a typical neighborhood, what does KICA do in a neighborhood? What are we responsible for? So obviously we're responsible for roads and drainage. Most of our owners are aware of that. Trails and boardwalks, ponds, signage, so all the roadway signage, we're in charge of that. Any amenities that are within a neighborhood that are KICA's. Road right-of-way landscaping at a typical standard, and we'll talk about that more in depth. Line of sight issues on roadways, blow roads and pick up debris, and arborist work in road rights-of-way. And certainly you've seen that around the island, particularly as we prepare for the PGA, and we're getting ready to have the charter buses running across the island. We've been doing a lot of work lifting canopies throughout the residential neighborhoods. We've done some canopy lifting in the preserve neighborhood over the winter as well. So let's talk about a typical neighborhood. And I picked one that I thought most owners are familiar with, so it's easier for you to compare it in your head. This is Rhett's Bluff neighborhood. It's a little bit smaller community than the preserve community. You all are at about 175 properties, and Rhett's Bluff is at approximately 80, so it's a little bit smaller. But it is a typical neighborhood for us in how it's maintained. It does not have an HOA, so it is maintained by KICA. So let's talk about the road rights of way, because that's really what we're talking about. So if you look in front of an area that has an undeveloped lot, or it's an open area where no home sites are. These are photographs from the Retz Bluff area taken last summer. The road rights-of-way are not irrigated. They are not landscaped. They have natural or volunteer growth. Kika mows them weekly during the summer season and as needed in the spring or fall. And if there's damage to the road or to the landscaping along the road right-of-way, we repair it by hydroseeding. So the top left photo is at the corner of Retz Bluff and Shoalbred Court. That is in front of an undeveloped lot. And the lower one is Retz Bluff Road, and this is in front of an area without home sites currently. Now you see a dramatic change in the photographs. Again, the photographs were all taken about the same time last July. So this is in front of developed lots in Retz Bluff neighborhood. So the way in a typical neighborhood that road rights-of-way are handled is that the members are encouraged to adopt, it's the word we use, adopt that road right-of-way into their landscape plan. So that 10, 12, 14 feet of the road right-of-way that Kika owns, those members adopt it. They extend their landscape plan all the way to the asphalt edge. They extend their irrigation all the way to asphalt edge, and they maintain it. And these are two photographs of developed lots in the Retz Bluff area. If a developed lot owner says, you know what, we don't want to maintain the road right-of-way, so if the owner up in that top right photo had said, I don't want to maintain the road right-of-way, Kika maintains it, so probably that area in front of that mulch bed would be Kika's to maintain. Then it's maintained at our standard. So it's not irrigated, and it's just volunteer growth. So as members make their own aesthetic decisions within the Retz Bluff neighborhood, this could be their level of maintenance, their plantings, their turf species, how they're choosing to water. A patchwork appearance may be created between lots. So where person A has chosen this grass species, which is watered at a certain level, which is maintained at a different mowing height than person B who's next door, you can sometimes start to see the lot lines develop. And then if they're adjacent to an area where Kika maintains and there's no irrigation there and it's just volunteer growth, you'll see the difference along the road right-of-way. It's not right or wrong, it's just different. So entrances and medians and cul-de-sacs, I almost got that out. Kika maintains these. So this is the neighborhood entrance area for the Retz Bluff neighborhood. Most are maintained with natural plantings and drip irrigation. Some will be maintained with color beds, and Kika maintains these. So if you talk about the preserve, now what we want to do is we want to look at the preserve neighborhood and we want to talk about why is that different from Retz Bluff, the way we take care of a standard neighborhood here on the island where there is no HOA. Okay. So we know that back in 2018, a decision was made not to subsidize additional landscaping expenses in the preserve and in the Ocean Park neighborhood. Both neighborhoods are the same. Neither one has an HOA, and they are maintained by Kika. So a segment assessment was increased for these neighborhoods. This is the preserves specifically, and this shows where the jump was between 2018 and 2019 of about $1,000 per improved property. Okay. Initially in 2018, many expenses were estimated as expenses were being segmented out from the larger Kika land management budget. In 2019, Kika made a move to ensure that all expenses charged to the preserve members could be substantiated by invoice. Expenses are tracked separately from our land management budget today. The preserve has its own account and accounting. And that's an important distinction to make, that everything that is being charged against the assessments that you're paying today are substantiated by invoice. So let's talk about what's currently happening in the road rights of way in the preserve. And again, not right or wrong compared to Rhett's Bluff, it's a different design choice. When the master developer designed Rhett's Bluff, they decided to allow that adoption of the road right of way through the neighborhood. Fine. When they developed the preserve at Ocean Park, they developed it with the intention of this more parkway look along the road rights of way. It's fine. It's just a design choice. So let's talk about what's happening in the preserve. You have irrigated road rights of way throughout most of the neighborhood. Most road rights of way are sodded with St. Augustine grass, which then takes chemical application to treat it. We do turf repair by sod replacement in the preserve. You probably saw that recently. Last week we were doing some sod replacement in the preserve as well as around the island in preparation for PGA. So if this was Rhett's Bluff, we would hydroseed, but in the preserve we came in with sod. Pardon me. We do an annual pine straw application to road rights of way within the preserve, mostly along the fence line that you see in the picture. If that has not started yet, it is due to start any moment. You have 5 tractor trailers of pine straw coming in for the preserve, same amount as you had last year. And then, of course, you have the aesthetic detail of the fence in various locations throughout your neighborhood. So these additional landscaping services have resulted in the higher segment assessment for your neighborhood. What is not being charged to preserve? A lot of our preserve members understand this, but I want to make sure that we're really clear what you're not being charged for with your assessment. Your leisure trails, we're not charging those. Those are community assets. We just went through and sand shelled a lot of your leisure trails and did some repairs on your leisure trails this spring. That comes from KICA's main budget, so it does not come from your preserve assessment. Maintenance of the ponds, maintenance of the roads and drainage, and then KICA's facilities. So Cinder Creek Pavilion, Eagle Point Boat Launch, Blue Heron View Tower, those are KICA facilities. And members of the preserve are not asked to pay for those. So the KICA board wants to give preserve members an opportunity to decide the level of landscaping and expenses that they want for the neighborhood. So to make that choice, you have to know what happens if you choose the option that's not what you have today. So let's talk about that. If the members of the preserve vote to make a change, what does it mean? So in the road rights of way, again, what we're talking about, KICA would turn off its road rights of way irrigation systems. We would shut them down within these road rights of way along these home areas. So in front of a developed lot, members have choices. You may choose to adopt the road right-of-way, just like what you saw in the Rhett's Bluff area. You may extend your own irrigation out into the road right-of-way area, and you can maintain it as it exists today. Or you can speak with the ARB and talk about making a landscape change for the road right-of-way area, because you are now adopting it into your landscape plan. Or the road right-of-way will be permitted to return to natural growth with no chemical treatment, and it'll be mowed by KICA, and will repair by hydroseed as opposed to today's sod replacement. So this came up in Friday's meeting, that there will, if the members of the preserve choose to change what's going on, then there'll be an additional conversation with KICA to say, I want to maintain my road right of way, I want to adopt it, or I want KICA to continue to handle everything in front of the fence. And that's fine. And we're happy to go either way. So in front of areas with undeveloped lots, or areas where there are no home sites. Again, Kika's irrigation systems would be turned off, and the road right-of-way would be permitted to return to natural growth with no chemical treatment. It'll be mowed by us, and any repairs will be done by HydroSeed. Pardon me, I have a tickle in my throat. Medians and cul-de-sacs. So your medians, you have 2 medians and 9 cul-de-sacs in the preserve neighborhood today. Irrigation would continue to these areas. These areas will be maintained as they exist today, as you know them today. Just like Rhett's Bluff, we would maintain them. Pond edges, your immediate pond edges will be maintained as they exist today. The photograph is taken from the preserve. View windows will be maintained as they exist today as well. There are no irrigation systems along your pond edges. Your neighborhood entrance, just like we talked about Rhett's Bluff, we maintain a neighborhood entrance. So this is the immediate neighborhood entrance to the preserve, where your sign is located at Governor's and Blue Heron. Kika right now has defined your neighborhood entrance as Blue Heron Pond Road from Governor's Drive to your vehicular bridge, both inbound and outbound sides. So as you know, in thinking about that area, that is landscape bed like what you see in the picture. It's also some turf areas. So Kika would maintain these as you see them today. So let's talk about preserve expenses. Let's understand them a little bit more as you begin to make your choice for the vote that's coming up here in a couple of weeks. These are 2020 actuals, what you see on this page, and there's a lot of information on this page, so let's talk through it. Your 2020 revenue was $174,000. That revenue is all segment assessment. So that's the assessment that you all paid as members to Kika in 2020. In 2020, the expenses for the preserve were $181,855. So there's a difference of about $7,700 in 2020. You can see in the bottom right corner, those are your actual expenses, but I like the pie chart. It's kind of an easier way to see all of the expenses broken out. Obviously, irrigation, pine straw, and labor, which is the greenery contract, are driving your expenses in the preserve neighborhood. Electricity is related to our irrigation systems. Turf and plant replacements in there are a very low number, and then your fence is actually a pretty low number. So the segment assessment is capped for Kika. This is a formula out of the Kika covenants as to what we're allowed to charge in a segment assessment, and it's 1/2 of the maximum assessment permitted. We have tried to control expenses within the preserve neighborhood. Irrigation water is certainly one of the drivers that you have in your neighborhood at 30% of your 2020 expenses. So even with increased management in 2019 and 2020, using more wetting agents within the preserve, and then even having a higher year of rainfall in 2020, you can see that we've had significant savings in your water bill in 2020 compared to where we were in 2018. However, it's still not enough to lower the segment assessment. And again, everything that's represented on this page in terms of expenses are based on invoices received by Kika. There are no estimates in these numbers. So there's a lot of words on this page too. So let's talk through this. As discussed previously, Kika made the decision in 2019 that everything was going to be charged and substantiated by invoice. In doing that, we had to make reasoned compromises in this decision. So while there are some expenses being charged to the preserve, which say aren't charged to Rhett's Bluff members, there are others that are not being charged. So let's talk about what those two buckets are. So currently charged to the preserve is the irrigation of those medians, cul-de-sacs, and entrance that we talked about, and the labor to maintain these areas. Why is that being charged to the preserve right now? Because those irrigation systems for the medians and cul-de-sacs are not all individually metered. They're part of larger road rights-of-way systems, most of them. So we would have to estimate what that water is. We'd also have to estimate what that labor is to maintain the two medians, the cul-de-sacs, and the entrance. Again, we only wanted everything substantiated by invoice. We didn't want any estimates. So these are currently part of preserve charges. However, there's a flip side. What's not charged to the preserve? Currently, labor for new sod installation is not charged to the preserve because it's being handled by KICA's employees. So that happened in 2020. The sod that was just installed last week was handled again by KICA employees. So you're not being charged for that labor. You're not being charged for labor and materials related to irrigation repairs. KICA estimates that's about 8% of your water bills. But again, it is not charged against your assessment because it is an estimate. We obviously have to go in and do irrigation zone system checks throughout all of your irrigation systems, and those are not charged. And then as we're doing fence repair and replacement in your neighborhood, we're not charging for the labor. It's only the 14,000, where's the number? 13,613 that was charged for your fence. That's just materials from 2020. We did not charge any of the labor. Why didn't we do that? Again, these labor hours are KICA employees and or contracted labor that KICA has from H-2B employees. We don't keep employee hours detailed in this way, so it would be an estimate. Again, we don't want to deal in estimates. We just want to deal in substantiated invoices. So we went back and looked at the two buckets. We're estimating that the preserve is approximately carrying $18,400 to $24,600 annually in expenses, but not being charged about $28,500. We consider these numbers relatively equal. This is 3 years on budget for the preserve, 2019 actuals, 2020 actuals, and your 2021 budget currently. You can see that your assessment income is going up a little bit, certainly in a change in your assessment, but also in your property mix. So as your property mix changes, that assessment number will change because, of course, undeveloped properties are paying half of the assessment that the developed properties are. So you'll see that assessment mix change. You can see the expenses across the bottom. Your average right now is $190,000 a year across the 3 years. I can tell you that your pine straw bill in 2021 is about to come down. We had estimated at $47,000, which is what we paid last year. Doug went out to bid, who is your director of land and lakes, and he has got your pine straw down this year to $36,200. Same exact amount of pine straw that you had going into your community last year, but that bill is coming down at $36,200. So we'll see a little bit of savings there too, which is great. All right, so let's talk about the vote, because we're going to ask you all to make a decision for your neighborhood. And as Dave Morley stated, we're not taking a position. It's a decision. So option 1 is you keep your current standard with the additional landscaping services. The pro is it maintains the current aesthetic of your neighborhood. The con is there's a higher segment assessment that remains in place. So 2021, your annual assessment, just as a reminder, was 1302 improved and 651 unimproved. Option 2 is you make a change in the standard and you eliminate the additional services. Now, one thing I have to stop and say here is that this vote is not related to your fence at all. It is only about the landscaping. The master developer retains the right to make decisions about that fence. So KICA is only asking about the landscaping. Your fence would remain. So the pro in making the change in the standard is it lowers your segment assessment substantially to fence repair and maintenance only. And if con is it could make a significant change in the neighborhood aesthetic, potentially creating a more inconsistent look throughout the neighborhood. I went back, figured out your current property mix today from the 2021 assessments, looked at your approximately $14,000 budget on fence repairs, and based on where your current property mix is, it would lower your annual segment assessment to about 104 improved and 52 improved. Please understand this is an estimate. I got nervous even putting this on the page. This has to go through budget approval to set that assessment amount, but I wanted you to have a general idea as to, based on your property mix, what that assessment could lower to. So let's talk about the vote. This is the second of the 2 neighborhood meetings. Both videos, today's and the one from last week, are being posted to our YouTube channel, so your friends and neighbors that were unable to attend can certainly view this presentation and the discussion. We're going to open the vote on Monday, May 24th, in approximately 2 weeks. We're going to close the vote on Tuesday, June the 22nd. Our date of record is next Monday, May the 17th. What does that mean? That is the date that you must be a preserve owner in order to participate in this vote. Certainly with the high real estate closings that we're having, lots of properties are changing hands. You must be a preserve owner as of that date of record in order to participate in this vote. So someone that purchases property over Memorial Day weekend will not be eligible to vote. One member from each property located in the preserve may vote, similar to how we do our elections today for board of directors. We'll use weighted voting. Developed properties will have 2 votes. Undeveloped properties will be counted 1. This is the participation requirement is something that is important to our KICA board of directors. 51% participation is needed by preserve members to make a change. Voting will be electronic using Vote Now, which is what you're used to with your board of director elections. And members without valid emails, right now I have about 4, will be sent a letter via US mail directing them how to vote online, because we want everyone to have an opportunity to weigh in and to participate in the neighborhood vote. All right, that was a lot of information, but that's the end of my presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to let Leah open things up to questions, comments.
All right. We had a few pre-submitted questions, so I'll start with those. And then meanwhile, I will show you once again really quick how to raise your hand so you can let us know that you would like to comment. Here we go. So if you navigate to your control panel and hit that participants button, a screen will pop out and you'll get the raise hand option. You'll see your name listed and a raised hand icon will show up. So that will let us know that you have a question. But I'm going to start with these pre-submitted questions. John Z. Irwin, who I don't see on the call today, from Gray Widgeon, he asked about 4 questions that were answered in the presentation about ownership of rights of way, if that changes in any scenario. And the answer is no, that KICA maintains ownership of the rights of way no matter what scenario. And then he kind of also had a question about KICA's responsibilities in each scenario for maintenance. And currently KICA maintains the rights of way at the preserve standard. And if the neighborhood would vote on a change, KICA would maintain the rights of way at the typical Kiawah standard, or residents could adopt rights of way into their landscape. So I think that covers his questions, but I will reach out to him to make sure we've addressed that in this presentation. And then he had one comment that said it would be helpful if you could summarize the findings from both of these meetings, outlining the questions and answers without bias. And I did want to draw your attention to, I added the link to the first meeting the YouTube link is available in the chat right now. So you can go and watch all of the first presentation, and in the description of the YouTube video, I even point out where those Q&As start. So if you want to skip the presentation, you can go directly to the Q&A and listen to all of your neighbors' comments. And we'll do the same for today, posting this video. Sue Schaefer had a comment. She said, and she's on Blue Heron Pond, if you want to do away with the current higher level of landscaping and maintain your right of way yourself, please consider the cost of that. Board Director David DiStefano did the calculations for mowing and irrigation of his own strip for his 4-bedroom house and determined that it was costing him more than the cost of the annual preserve segment assessment. So we aren't likely to save any money by doing it ourselves. Instead, I'm concerned that some people will save money by not doing anything, resulting in an uneven appearance of the preserve. Then we have a question from Kate Hain on Bull Thistle Lane. She was asking if residents along Governors will receive an assessment due to the unbelievable amount of pine straw and additional plants and flowers put down in the past weeks due to the PGA. She says, we have received none of that care. Do you have a comment on that?
Sure. As we talked about in the presentation, Governor's Drive is considered a parkway road or a spine road, an entrance to all neighborhoods. So no, their pine straw is not charged to the Governor's Drive members. The pine straw within the residential neighborhood of the preserve is charged to preserve members because we don't generally do inside residential neighborhoods. The PGA plantings was a commitment that the board of directors made as part of the 2021 budget to heighten the landscaping around the island in preparation for the PGA, and that was taken from the landscape capital improvement budget as part of the 2021 budget.
All right. Lynn O'Leary submitted a question in advance, and I see you here today also. So I'll read your question and then I'll go to you to follow up. Lynn asked, is KICA going to be sending out updates about voting like you do for all elections? I can answer that since I'll be part of the communications, and that is yes. We are using the same voting platform as we do for the annual directors election. So you'll get voting reminders from them, and you'll also get information from us. We'll put everything that's been presented today on our website and email that out to make sure you guys have all the resources you need. So yes, we will be sending out updates. Lynn, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yes, Emily, I'm sorry. I have several questions and comments, so I wrote them down to be prepared. Ms. Shannon, thank you for the information about saying that the line of sights were corrected or worked on by the arborist out here. However, I will tell you, I was coming down on Monday down Blue Heron behind a large cement truck, and branches and leaves were flying all around. So, and this was on Blue Heron, which is the main road. So my question is, we really need to look at this. We have so much canopy and these trucks are taller and taller. And I don't believe that we have a height restriction on the island, but every time these trucks hit these branches, they're just, the bigger ones are going to start to fall because they're going to be unsteady. And to me, that's a dangerous situation.
Sure. And Ms. O'Leary, if I can answer that, you know Doug Walter, our Director of Land and Lake.
I do.
Yeah, and he's actually on this call and he's listening for these kinds of comments and things that can be improved within your current scope of contract or that are KICA's responsibility. So
okay,
he's listening for these comments from you.
Okay, and then my other question is, I know David brought this up. Have you guys had the opportunity to talk about where actually you talked about the front of the bridge, and that comment was that, you know, there's that huge park-like area that you guys have put all of those benches. Has the board had an opportunity to talk about that should actually be part of KICA's responsibility and not the preserve homeowners?
Sure. For the other members who are on the call today, Mr. O'Leary actually spoke about, could we extend our definition of neighborhood entrance to include that area directly across the bridge at the T of Blue Heron Pond Road? It is not something that we have discussed yet,
Okay.
but certainly we are going to look at it. We need
Okay.
to figure out, we need to try and isolate it and figure out what the costs are.
Okay, perfect. I'm sorry, I have a few more questions.
No, it's okay.
When you guys talked about, you did the little pie chart,
Yes, ma'am.
and I'm going to admit, I'm not the savvy one who pays the bills here. I prefer to spend the money than adjust the money. We all pay a Kika fee, people on Surf Song, people on Augusta National. I mean, everywhere in Kiawah, we pay a fee. And part of those fees, because we all have roadway, just like Retz Bluff does, part of those fees cover that expense of the water and the maintenance, because they don't have their own HOAs that do that. When you did the breakout for that pie, it only showed what we pay as an assessment here in the preserve. It doesn't show any percentage, even if it's like 2% of what we pay towards our Kika assessment. That should be allocated in a sense to show that we're not over budget, because we're essentially then paying for ours and everybody else's, and none of that is coming back to us when we are a destination. So as much as I love the pie chart, my question with the pie chart, how fair is it? How is it really fair when you're just looking at we're paying, but we're also paying our regular Kika assessments and fees that's not put into that pie chart?
Sure. So the pie chart was geared strictly to the segment assessment. And so that you could see what was coming in and what was going out related to the segment assessment. So you're correct at that. It doesn't talk about the overall assessment that you all pay as a general assessment.
Right. So that's my point, Shannon, is that we're almost paying twice, which I'm not trying to be difficult, but I just want to make sure people on this call realize this, is that we're paying for in our fees like everybody else pays a fee. So when you look at it and you show that we have a deficit, we really don't have a deficit, because the monies that we pay out of the general Kika fees is more than enough for that. So going on that, my next question is that as much as we pay for irrigation, and I cannot understand why this isn't done, when a lot is going to be developed or a homeowner is going to do work on their house, they all have these little knobs that you go over to our irrigation heads and you turn them off, right? You just turn them off. So if somebody's doing construction, it baffles me why you just don't turn those off, because the guys run over them, especially on all of these streets. They're so narrow. They've got to pull onto the grass. Otherwise, you can't even get one car and a bike by. So meanwhile, for the year and a half that you're doing construction, these heads are broken. They're spraying water everywhere, and we're paying for it. It makes zero sense. As soon as that permit is given, why aren't those heads turned off? It can save you astronomical amounts of money, and it eliminates the road flooding every time the heads are broken.
I think it's a good suggestion. I can't answer the question. I'm not an irrigation expert, but we can ask Doug to look at whether or not, if construction occurs, can we cap off in areas? Obviously, you have large road right-of-way irrigation systems. I can't just shut it down.
No. You can individually turn off each head, because we've done it with all our irrigation systems where we live. And it just seems like it would be so much more proactive than constantly, having this water spew everywhere for the year and a half, 2 years that we're going to be in this building.
And you are correct. Construction is hard on your irrigation systems.
It's terrible. It's terrible. So the last thing I want to just say is that, as David had mentioned, we've lived here for 9 years and we've faithfully paid our assessment. I have to say that when you put hydroseed on roots where there's no grass and nothing is even remotely turned up so the hydroseed can take in those undeveloped lots, you're wasting your money. Because you have to look at this situation out here as that there are a lot of undeveloped lots and you water them. So it's a mud bath, right? It's a total, if kids were here, they can just play in the mud for days. The roots are exposed. So I think it's great that we say we hydroseed, but I'm not really sure what we're hydroseeding because it's such a mess. I have pictures I can share with everybody, but I won't bore you. I don't think we've ever had a higher standard. We've lived here for 9 years and the same roots and the same mud are there. So that is my total bane of my existence with this assessment, is that we're paying for something that we've never received, ever. I mean, we're no prettier and no uglier than we were 9 years ago. So if we go back to not paying the assessment, if that's what the preserve decides, then I don't think it changes anything. So thank you, Shannon, for the time and the consideration. I appreciate it. And
No problem, Lynn.
fellow neighbors, thanks for bearing with me.
Thanks. All right, now we've got Paul Hennessy.
Oh, hi, guys. Thanks, Leah. Thanks, Shannon, for doing this twice. I just had a couple of quick questions. More than half of the total cost that you've identified that's specific to the segment landscaping is water and pine straw. It's about a third water, pine straw, and labor, roughly a third. Those are the big items. For the water and the labor, are these the same costs that are borne broadly across the island in terms of the overall KICA budget, or is the for example, is the Greenway contract for the preserve different than the Greenway contract labor for other parts of the island? Are those two costs, water for irrigation and labor, the same across all of KICA activities?
Sure. So let's start with the greenery contract. The greenery contract is unique to the preserve. The greenery only maintains the preserve for KICA. It's the only portion where we contract for that. So that greenery contract is all spent within the preserve confines of that neighborhood. One thing that came up at the previous meeting is whether or not we could lower that cost. You're currently on a month-to-month contract in the greenery. Certainly, if members of the preserve choose that they want to move forward with the current setup, the current structure, we could certainly go out to bid on that contract and try and lock you into a longer term contract that may lower that cost a little bit. But the greenery is only maintaining the preserve for KICA currently. So there is nothing else going in other areas. KICA is maintaining with its own staff the other areas, including Ocean Park. In terms of irrigation, all of the irrigation systems that are identified as a preserve expense are located entirely within the preserve, if that answered your question.
Shannon,
Okay, so I guess what I would just follow up with is, and I don't expect you to do it on this call, but I guess I would just ask you to consider whether there is a more efficient way, if there is a more efficient way to provide the labor content rather than a separate Greenway labor contract that includes labor. I don't know whether it is more or less costly, frankly, but I would just suggest taking a look at that. I have no idea whether, when you do the cost accounting, it's exactly the same, it's higher or lower, no idea. But I think that because it's a third of the cost, that might be a useful thing to look at. The second question that I had is this choice for the preserve is presented in a binary fashion, i.e. the current standard or the regular way KICA standard, which is fine. I understand that. That makes it simple. But I wonder if there is potentially another option. So for example, if we didn't want to pay for pine straw, if we didn't want to pay for the special seeding, if we didn't want to pay for the greenery labor, but rather the implicit labor associated with general KICA maintenance. If that were the option, i.e. just the irrigation as the big incremental item, how could the preserve members, if that was deemed to be a good idea, and I don't know that it is, but how would we go about framing that as a choice?
Let me talk about that one for a second. I think that if we start dividing this up, we kind of lose responsibility and authority being matched. And that if an individual homeowner decides to adopt their road right-of-way, and then something doesn't go well, I'm worried that if they're not controlling the irrigation of that, then we're going to constantly have battles over, well, was it the irrigation that made it not work, or was it that the landscaper's job didn't make it work? I think keeping the accountability with the responsibility for the maintenance is an important factor. Secondly, if many of the road right-of-ways are adopted by individual owners, then they won't decide at the same time when to sod, when to do different things. And we can't change the irrigation to each individual homeowner. So that if your neighbor decides they need to sod next week, they'll want more water on that sod than you're going to want. And our ability to balance that home by home is very limited. So I think it causes problems to be sort of halfway in this. And I think that we're better off by having a decision of who's going to take responsibility for the maintenance of that property and have all the elements of that maintenance controlled by the same entity.
Okay, well, okay. So, pardon me, Dave, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the complexity. Why don't we just leave it there? I did think that it might be possible to have a third option, but I understand your point, and I'll give it some thought. But why don't we just leave it there for now? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Paul, there was one more thing I think we could clarify a little better for you. With your first question about what a person in a typical standard neighborhood pays for irrigation and labor, and I'll let Shannon explain, but I believe in the typical standard, no one is paying, there is no irrigation, so there are no water costs. So that's a significant difference in the preserve standard, is there is irrigation and there are significant water costs. Shannon, is that correct?
So if you're comparing Reds Bluff and preserve, just to keep the same comparisons, so everybody has the same images in their head. If it's a developed lot in Reds Bluff, those owners are extending their irrigation all the way to asphalt, and then they're paying for that irrigation water, and they're paying for the maintenance and the landscape. In the preserve currently, as it exists today, KICA is maintaining that road right-of-way. We're paying for the irrigation, the sod, and the care of that road right-of-way. So there's a difference in cost. In Reds Bluff, that's being borne by the developed lot owner in front of their home. In the preserve, it's being borne by KICA currently. Certainly within Reds Bluff, KICA maintains water to its medians, cul-de-sacs, and neighborhood entrances. We were asked on the Friday call for how much money that is. And so we went back and looked at that, and it's just over $5,000 for a year in terms of water to maintain the medians, cul-de-sacs. Within Reds Bluff, it is a smaller neighborhood than you have. So KICA has estimated that if we shut everything down, but we maintain your entrance, medians, and your 9 cul-de-sacs, that it's going to cost us around $10,000 a year to maintain those for you if you all choose option 2.
Yeah, not to further divert the discussion here, but my question simply was whether the labor component and the water component cost to the preserve for the specialist segments assessment was comparable to the labor and water costs that are involved in the general overall KICA budget. That was really my question.
Sure. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks. Yep. Thank you.
All right, next we've got Kathleen Hain. Kathleen, go ahead. You are muted.
There you go. Sorry. We have the big labor costs back here. I would like to know who monitors the guys that come back here. The one guy sits on the lawnmower and he rides around, and 2 guys sit in the truck and monitor what he's doing. And I will agree with what Lynn said. We've lived back here 6 years, and if we hadn't maintained the pond across the street from us, it would look a wreck. And I think I mentioned this, I wrote you some emails. We have pulled vines off of trees. We have had the palm trees maintained. We've added plantings. We've had our own landscapers cut the shrubbery so it looks better. And as you even approach Bull Thistle, where I am, at the corner of Bull Thistle and Blue Heron, you can't quite see it now, but as the leaves start to come off the trees, you will see this enormous nest of dead vines hanging. To me, if they're maintaining our properties back here, that would be such an obvious thing to go in and have the greenery, yank all that stuff down. I agree. I don't see any major improvement since I've lived here 6 years in the landscaping. And I think if you really want to find out where your labor is, you can check the boat launch back there. They sort of go back there and hibernate at times. So I just really want to know who's monitoring them.
Thank you for the comments, Kathleen. Certainly, the Greenery does have an account manager that's monitoring for the preserve, and then Doug is also monitoring the contract. Doug is on this call. He is listening to these comments so that he can take these observations back to the Greenery and try to ensure that they're doing what they need to be doing. And we can certainly go out to bid if the preserve decides that they want to stay with KICA maintaining throughout, and we can go to bid and we can try to find a contract that's comparable for you.
Thank you.
Or maybe lower cost, even better.
Yes, agreed.
Agreed. Thank you, Kathleen.
All right, next we've got Jim. Go ahead, Jim Gilliam.
Thank you. If we vote to go with the lesser of the 2 maintenance situations, does KICA have a minimum standard that they would hold the homeowners to for the property in front of their yards? For example, if a homeowner's gone for a long time, doesn't cut the grass, it gets really high, or if the grass just gets bare, or if the homeowner plants some kind of plantings in there that come up to the road. I mean, is there some kind of a minimum standard there?
Yes, sir, there is. Thank you for the question. If you go to KICA's website and about KICA governing documents, our rules and regs are posted there. There is an entire section of KICA's rules and regs that relate to routine landscape requirements. Certainly in the preserve, the road rights of way are under KICA's care right now, but in a typical neighborhood like Rhett's Bluff, if the homeowner has adopted that road right of way and KICA is not maintaining it, then we expect the owner to maintain it. And if, by your example, they're gone for a long period of time, maybe they fire their landscaper and they don't rehire one, and they're not maintaining the property, or the property is falling into a state of disrepair, then Kika's livability team will contact that owner and work to bring them back into compliance. Kika certainly retains the right by covenant to enter a property and to force the cure. In terms of landscaping, we don't do it in terms of home maintenance, but in terms of landscaping, we have done it in some extreme circumstances. But again, those are rare. And then we would charge the owner for that.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, sir?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Right, next we're going to Brad McIlvain. Brad, sorry, I skipped over you.
No problem. Couple things. I'm following up on one on Paul's question. When we talked about what the standard services were for every neighborhood, one is mowing and blowing of the roads and things like that. Currently, it appears that the greenery does that, so that's part of their contract. Have we backed out those costs from the greenery contract to determine what's different, what's in addition to what is what Kika normally does in every neighborhood?
So that was related to the slide that we talked about where we made the reasoned compromises, that we think that the preserve is currently bearing, let me see if I can do it off the top of my head, somewhere between 18 and 25,000 that would be normally covered by Kika. But then there are the labor expenses that Kika is currently spending in the preserve that would be estimated. And we're guessing that's around 28,000. So we're considering them about comparable.
Okay.
That answer your question, sir?
I guess the fencing, I think one of the things that wasn't noted is that I think most people have seen that we've changed fencing contractors. And the fencing that's being used now is about roughly a quarter of the price of the fencing that was being used previously. It's also treated, so it hopefully should last longer than the fencing.
Oh, please God.
And the $13,000 that was spent last year, that fencing actually wasn't installed until this year. And so I'm not sure even all of it was installed this year. But you bought a lot of fencing. So the thought is that over time, probably in the next 2 or 3 years, the fencing costs should go down as well.
Yes, I agree with you. In being able to make the change, we made the change because white cedar was called for your original preserve fence. We used the same suppliers that Kiawah Partners gave us the fence with, and have used that for 20 years. And now white cedar is no longer able to be sourced in that way. So we switched to a treated pine, which is what Brad is speaking about, and it is commercially available to us instead of out of the state of Maine. It is commercially available to us through Home Depot, which is awesome because that lowers our cost. And it is treated, so hopefully it will last longer. We are replacing in larger increments because the two fence types don't mix well. They look fine next to each other, but the fence types mixed in together don't mix well. So we're replacing in large segments. And hopefully, yeah, you should be right that in a few years, once we can get it all changed out to the treated pine, that your fence repair and maintenance bills should go down.
And that should also lower any labor costs associated with fence repairs as well.
Absolutely.
It should, and as if water continues to go down or if the fence bills go down, we're more than happy to lower the assessments. And by tracking it with invoices every year, we will set it based on what our experience is, so that there's no intent to ever make this a profit center for Kika. We would never do that. And so it's perfectly feasible to say that numbers could go down in the future.
It was a good thing to point out. I didn't even pick up the fence in this presentation, so thank you for that.
All right, Daphne wrote a question in the chat and said, you stated you would maintain up to the fence. Some homes do not have fences. Where would you draw the line?
So we'll have to look at individual properties. That'll be a conversation with that owner and probably with Doug Walter, who's our Director of Land and Lakes, so that we can specify where the line is. The fence is an easy line, but you're right, there are some properties that don't have the fence.
Katrina Steele asks, what about in developed lots in a natural state? That is the minimum standard. Katrina, can you explain what you're asking here? Or maybe this was in reference to a comment to an earlier.
Oh, undeveloped lots. She's putting that on the chat. So I think, Katrina, what you're saying, and if I'm getting this wrong, tell me by chat because I can see that, that you're asking about undeveloped lots being maintained in a natural state. We get this question actually not just in the preserve, but across the island from neighbors that have an undeveloped lot near them. There is no requirement in KICA's rules and regs to maintain an undeveloped lot. So they are left completely natural. There is no vine control, anything like that. Certainly the road right-of-way right in front of an undeveloped lot is maintained by KICA. If there is a dangerous tree, we've had this happen quite a bit. If the dangerous tree is on KICA's road right-of-way and it's threatening a road or trail, then we are removing or handling that. If there's a dangerous tree on an undeveloped lot that's threatening a developed home, we're connecting those two owners so that they can talk about how to manage it. But undeveloped lots have no requirement to maintain. Is an owner welcome to come? This is Katrina again. To come through and to just underbrush a lot. That is a conversation with the ARB.
All right, let's go back up to Craig. Sedmak asked, it's my understanding that homeowners with fencing would have an option not to replace the fence if in need for the repair. Is that accurate or unable to do given the master neighborhood plan?
So it's a conversation with the ARB currently, and certainly some members have gone through that conversation as they've developed their homes or if they're redeveloping their homes or landscapes, and have had a conversation with the Architectural Review Board about the removal of the fence. That is not a KICA decision, that's an ARB decision.
Can I just, this is Brad, can I just,
Sure.
Maura did have the conversation with, I think it's Jen Howe, right?
Jen Hayes,
I always get her last name wrong, Hayes.
Okay.
And I think what her response to people is, if you want to remove it, she generally doesn't have a problem with it. So, you know, if you don't like it in front of your house, you can have the conversation with the ARB, and it sounds like they're going to be receptive to removing it.
Sure. Yeah, but again, it's an ARB decision, it's not KICA.
Carol Dunn asks, as you turn off Blue Heron onto Oyster Shell, there's a large area on the left that is a strip of dirt. At one point, seeding was attempted but didn't work. Who is responsible for maintaining that area? It looks awful.
That is a crazy area, and it was never irrigated. It was never, no irrigation was put in by the master developer. Understand when KICA receives road rights of way or we receive property, the master developer puts in the infrastructure and then KICA receives it from them. And there was no irrigation put in that area. KICA has tried several times, as you've stated, to hydroseed it. We actually brought in a contractor. We broke up the hard packed soil in that area and tried to hydroseed it again. It's just not a very successful area with hydroseed because there is no water in that area, and KICA has not borne the expense of installing irrigation for that area. But you're right, it's a tough area.
Jan, and I think that's the kind of thing that is great to put on Doug's list, because if we're going to maintain it and there are areas that are not acceptable, then we have to figure out alternatives. I mean, I don't know what the alternative is. I don't know if it's gravel or if it's, you know, some kind of other landscaping structure to put in there. But that's exactly what I think the benefit of having Doug here is that when those kinds of things come up, we ought to try to figure out a way to solve them.
I'm sure that just went on his list.
All right, Amy Lee has a question. If we stay with Kika doing the maintenance, how do we go about getting the sod replaced on our road rights of way area? Ours has been pretty dead for quite some time. Do we need to put in a request? I assumed the landscapers would assess and do that automatically.
Sure, Amy, we'll look up your address for you, and Doug is taking notes, and he'll go out and take a look at the area for you. All you have to do is contact Kika. You can do it through community in cases. You can call us at our main number. You can call to our maintenance office. You can email us, and Doug is happy to go out and look at it. But he'll take down your name and he'll go out and look at it for you, and he'll be in contact with you.
Daphne has another question. Did your expenses in your pie chart include those areas that Kika would continue to maintain?
Yes, currently.
All right.
So, can you hear me?
Yes.
So those areas Kika will always maintain, and everybody in the community is paying that, not only the preserve. I mean, how do you define? How do you divide it out?
Yeah, so that related back to a similar question that Brad had asked about what's in those numbers versus what's not in those numbers. And if the preserve makes the decision to go with option 2 and to change the services, then Kika is going to have to go through and do capping off of all of its irrigation and try to isolate those specific areas. Any irrigation systems that are no longer needed will actually shut off water meters, so we're not bearing those expenses. But it's going to be a process for us to try to isolate those areas. But we're willing to do that if that's the choice that you all make. Did I answer your question?
Kind of.
Oh, okay.
Craig had another comment. Craig, I'm not sure if this was in reference to an earlier comment, but he says, not sure homeowners are aware they have that option. I'm not sure what option he's referring to. Worthwhile to communicate to that group, most likely. They are generally large areas of the preserve where the grass is not taken or is not healthy. This needs to be addressed irrespective of this vote. Okay.
Fair enough. Thanks, Craig.
Yep. Lynn says, Carol, we have irrigation on almost all of our undeveloped lots and we have mud, dirt everywhere. Looks like what you're seeing on Oyster Shell. So Lynn has that issue as well. Doug, if you could note that. And does anyone else have, let's see, Carol asks, on the areas where there is no irrigation, why don't they just put down pine straw? Anything would be an improvement.
Fair enough.
Does anyone have any comments that they'd like to share? You're welcome to unmute your microphone and ask. I don't see any raised hands currently. Go ahead, Jim. I see you raising.
No question, Shannon, but if we're about done, I just want to thank you and everyone who helped you put this together. I thought it was a very thorough and well-presented accounting of what is going on and what our options are. So thank you.
You're welcome, sir. The Kika Board of Directors also saw this presentation before it was presented and offered their comments to try to make it as informative for you as possible.
Stephen, I see your hand is raised. Stephen Brody.
Yes, hi. Just a question about the use of fertilizer, chemicals, pesticide. I believe that's in the contract of the greenery. I have yet to see any evidence that such applications or treatments are being done. I haven't seen any crews doing it, and I haven't seen any signage that's usually put out when that is done. So has it been done is part A of my question. And part B is, who is actually monitoring the greenery? Who is actually giving them feedback on whether they're doing a good job, a bad job? And is there any documentation on the part of the Kika staff regarding their oversight of the greenery?
Sure. So Doug Walter is our Director of Land and Lakes, is the one that's overseeing the contract and monitoring. I can't answer specifically about what days or which applications of chemicals were put down. Doug would be able to answer that, and we can get that information to you.
Okay, and is there any documentation of his conversations with them, of his oversight of them?
Sure.
Because I suspect the answer is no.
I can't answer that. I'm sorry.
All right, remains to be seen.
Yeah, but we'll send you some, we can send you a separate email.
Yes,
And-
because what I see is the only thing I see the greenery do is drive down the right of way as fast as they can. I guess you don't have to spend that much time mowing dead grass, but there seems to be nobody out there supervising them and watching what they're doing.
That was a similar comment shared by, I think it was with Kathleen.
Mhm. All right, well, thank you. I look forward to that reply.
Thank you, Dr. Brody.
We've got another question from Katrina. She asks, in the future, is increased flooding expected to impact the landscaping of the preserve?
Is increased flooding? Certainly flooding impacted the preserve in terms of that wetland area that's located near Cinder Creek Pavilion and Bull Thistle. When the road was overtopped, I think it's lovingly referred to in the preserve as the swamp. I've at least heard a member of my board of directors refer to it that way. So yeah, that's you, Brad. So that was certainly an area where flooding did impact the preserve, and it impacted you all negatively in taking a freshwater wetland and impacting it with salt water. I don't know of another area specifically where that would occur, but that is certainly an area where it did occur in the past.
All right, does anyone have any last questions or comments? Oh, I see Maura, go ahead.
So the question I have is, we are currently using St. Augustine grass and using sod instead of the hydroseed for that. And given the poor quality throughout the preserve and the fact that the St. Augustine is not really showing well, and a lot of dirt spots and a lot of patchy areas, has anyone investigated, and this is maybe separate from the question of the vote, but whether there's a better alternative for us, almost irrespective of how the vote goes? Can we hydroseed with something else? Can we use a different sod that's not St. Augustine? I know that the decision for St. Augustine was not made by Doug, it was not made by Kika.
Right.
But given how difficult it is to keep it going, keep it, in good shape, is there an alternative that Doug can potentially look at so that, as I say, irrespective of what the vote is, we can end up having grass, pretty consistently in the neighborhood?
Yeah, certainly it's something we can talk about if you decide to stay with your current preserve maintenance, and we can talk about what those expenses could be to the neighborhood if we have to switch out sod species. The Ocean Park, when it was designed, is designed differently than the preserve. Certainly they have the same parkway type appearance with the irrigated road rights of way, but it's a different species of grass. It's paspalum, not St. Augustine, that was put into the Ocean Park.
Any other comments? Questions? I think that's it.
Let me then just kind of close this out by saying that, excuse me, that this is still a dialogue here. And if there are questions that come up, Leah can give you the email websites to send them to, or call us, or the vote's not for another 2 weeks, and then the vote will last for, I think, 30 days. at that time. And so please continue to give questions, and we will be as responsive as we possibly can so that your vote can have all the information that is available to you. So feel free to continue this dialogue with us through alternative communication vehicles, even though this is the last public meeting with the preserve community. So thank you for everyone for their participation and their questions, and let's keep the conversation going, and the vote will start in 2 weeks. Thank you.
And that email to contact is execoffice@kika.us. I put it in the chat.
Thanks, Leah.
Bye. Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.